Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to Kertrats Productions and welcome to 2024. In this video, I'm going to be talking about all of the Star Trek that you can watch and read and experience in 2024. Now, admittedly, things are a little light because of the twin strikes from last year, but even beyond just television, there's lots more Star Trek to experience. Although, actually, the book releases are a little light this year too. But let's get right into it and talk about everything coming for Star Trek in this year. So let's start with television shows. Now, we of course just came off the two big strikes in Hollywood, the WGA writers' strike and the SAG-AFTRA actors' strike, which meant that not a lot got done in Hollywood, either from the writing perspective while that strike was on, or from the production perspective while the actors were on the picket lines. But now both of those strikes are over, they've come to their agreements, and we have Star Trek and other things being produced once again. Now, one thing that wasn't really affected by that strike, but was still delayed a little bit because I'm sure they wanted to get some marketing out there. I am, of course, talking about Star Trek Discovery's fifth and sadly final season coming in April of 2024. Now, this is the only piece of Star Trek television that we have an approximate date for. There's been one trailer released quite some time ago, a teaser trailer, as well as a couple sneak peek clips from the show. Now, recently, we've also gotten the 10 episode titles for the entire season. And there's possibly some interesting little hints and clues in here about what we might be getting this season. So the first episode of the season is called Red Directive, written by Michelle Paradise. Episode 2 is called Under the Twin Moons by Alan McElroy. Episode 3 is Janal by Kyle Jarrow and Lauren Wilkinson. Episode 4 is Face the Strange by Sean Cochran, a nice little Bowie reference there. Episode 5 is Mirrors by Joanna Lee and Carlos Cisco. That title kind of says something Mirror Universe to me, I don't know about you. Episode 6 is called Whistle Speak by Kenneth Lynn and Brandon A. Schultz. Episode 7, Eriga by M. Raven Metzner. Episode 8 is Labyrinths by Lauren Wilkinson and Eric J. Robbins. Episodes 9 and 10, we're told, are a two-part episode that go together, with episode 9 being called Lagrange Point by Sean Cochran and Ari Friedman. A Lagrange Point, of course, I'm sure a lot of people have looked this up since these titles went public, is basically a point in space between two large gravitational objects where the gravitational fields are such that something can kind of stay there and remain there. That's kind of the broad basic definition of a Lagrange point. Interesting kind of interplanetary scientific term that I'm curious to see if it's literally meant in this episode or if it's more of a metaphor. And then finally, episode 10, the season finale and series finale of Star Trek Discovery, Life Itself by Kyle Jarrow and Michelle Paradise. Like I said, series finale of Star Trek Discovery, joining the ranks of other series finales such as All Good Things, What You Leave Behind, Endgame, and many, many more. So kind of interesting there. We're going to get our second series finale of Modern Trek after Star Trek Picard ended with The Last Generation in 2023. So there we go. Like I said, Star Trek Discovery, the only Star Trek show confirmed with a date or a relative date, April 2024. Now, the other piece of Star Trek that we know for sure that we are getting in 2024 is over on Netflix, and that is Star Trek Prodigy Season 2. We don't have a date for this yet. We have, of course, had some sneak peeks, that rather lengthy clip that was revealed some time ago that showed our child heroes starting their career in Starfleet. We got the introduction of, and spoilers here if you don't want to know anything about Prodigy Season 2, we had the Doctor show up from Star Trek Voyager, voiced, of course, by Robert Picardo, and the glimpse of the Voyager A, which was very, very cool. Very excited to see how this kind of all fits together. Season 2, we know, will center around the mission to rescue Chakotay and the crew of the original crew of the Protostar. I don't know about you, but I am very excited to see Season 2 of Prodigy. Now, interestingly, we had been reporting for the last few weeks that Star Trek Prodigy Season 1 would drop on Netflix on Christmas Day 2023, and indeed it did in many markets. What I had failed to realize is that is not the case in Canada. So if you are a Canadian listener and were expecting to see Prodigy Season 1 on Netflix, we were sadly disappointed in that respect. It is available on the CTV Sci-Fi channel and the CTV app, apparently in Canada, but not on Netflix. And presumably that will also be the case for Season 2 whenever we happen to get that in 2024. Now, the final piece of Trek on television that we might get in 2024, but we may see Star Trek Lower Decks 5th season release in 2024. If not, perhaps early 2025, but my guess is late 2024 we will see the 5th season of that animated Star Trek comedy, Lower Decks. So like I said, a little bit thin this year as far as television goes compared to previous years. Again, the twin strikes really kind of had an impact on that, but hopefully going forward in future years, there will be more to come. We've of course got Star Trek Starfleet Academy being worked on. Star Trek Section 31, the movie that will be streamed on Paramount Plus, is also currently being worked on, starring Michelle Yeoh. So lots of really cool Star Trek in the future. And of course, Strange New Worlds is currently filming up in Toronto. Moving on from Star Trek on television, we have books. Now, this is another arena in which Star Trek is a little bit thin in 2024. Not as thin as it was in 2023, but there are currently, from Simon & Schuster, only 3 Star Trek novels on the schedule for 2024. We may get more announcements. These are all in kind of the first half of the year, a little bit into the middle of the year. So there may be at least a couple more announcements for novels. I really hope. My fingers are crossed on this one. But so far, we do have these 3 novels. We have Star Trek Picard, Firewall by David Mack. This is coming out in February of 2024. So February 27th is the release date for that. This novel has to do with Seven of Nine and her backstory during her time with the Fenris Rangers. I'm really excited for this. Ever since we saw Seven of Nine show up in season 1 of Picard, I've been really curious about the story of her getting to where she was from where we saw her at the end of Voyager. And David Mack, one of my favorite authors, which is a phrase you're going to hear a lot in this section, I trust to do a really great job of telling this story. I'm really excited about it. If you follow him on Facebook or Twitter, he's been kind of releasing little hints and little snippets about the book, really ramping up the excitement for this one. So from there, we have to fast forward a few months to May 21st of 2024. We have a Star Trek The Next Generation novel, Pliable Truths by Dayton Ward. This one is also one that looks very exciting, and Dayton Ward is also one of my favorite Star Trek authors. This novel takes place between the TNG episodes Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2 and the Deep Space Nine premiere Emissary, and has to do with the Cardassian withdrawal from Bajor. And apparently Picard is there to help negotiate that withdrawal. Now, he of course is fresh off his experience being tortured for information under Gul Madred in the 2-parter Chain of Command, which puts him at a very interesting place here. It also promises to feature one of my favorite characters, Ensign Ro Laren. Of course, Bajor being her home planet, this will have a lot of significance for her character, so I'm expecting some really gripping character drama here. And given where they are and when it's set, Garrick is also a very likely face to be in this story, which I am very excited about. And the third and final Star Trek novel from Simon & Schuster that has been announced so far comes out on July 13th, 2024. That is Star Trek The Original Series, Lost to Eternity by Greg Cox, another one of my favorite Star Trek authors. And this novel is, again, one that's just right up my alley. This sounds like a lot of fun. It picks up on the story of Dr. Gillian Taylor, who of course was the cetacean biologist who hitched a ride with Kirk and his crew on the Bird of Prey to the 23rd century, leaving behind her life in the 20th century in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. Now, this novel picks up on that mystery. A few decades later, there's a true crime podcast all about the disappearance of Gillian Taylor, and that opens itself up to this kind of weird otherworldly thing that's going on. There's a story that ties in the 23rd century. I'm really excited about this. Greg Cox has done some really cool stuff with kind of 20th and 21st century stuff. So I'm very excited for this one as well. And Star Trek IV, one of my favorite films. I'm definitely not alone in that opinion, of course. I think this storyline is ripe for new stories being told about it, and I can't wait to see what Greg has come up with for this story. Now, those are all of the novels that are being put out by Simon & Schuster for this year so far, but we also have another book being put out by Titan Magazines, and that is Star Trek Explorer Presents The Mission and Other Stories. And that's coming out relatively soon, February 6th, just next month. This is featuring stories that were originally printed in the Star Trek Explorer magazine put out by Titan. And the authors featured in this book are Una McCormick, Gary Russell, Michael Carroll, John Peel, Chris Dowse, Chris Cooper, and the aforementioned Greg Cox. I haven't read any of these yet. I was subscribed to the Star Trek magazine before, but I kind of let that subscription lapse, so I've not been keeping up on these stories. So I will be picking this up, and hopefully we will be doing a podcast episode on the Positively Trek Book Club about this. I'm really fascinated by this, as, you know, a couple of the big name authors are in this list, as well as some other great storytellers, so definitely going to be some good stuff in here. And this is a series that is going to continue, so the Star Trek Explorer magazine continues to come out with new original fiction in it from various writers. Dave Mack, again, was talking about this recently on social media, about some of the stories he's been contracted to do for upcoming issues. So lots of really cool places to get Star Trek fiction, even if the novel releases are a little slow. There's definitely other sources for Star Trek stories. Now, speaking of other sources for Star Trek stories, an aspect of Star Trek publishing that has really stepped up recently, kind of filling the void that the novels have left, is the Star Trek comics. Now, IDW has been publishing Star Trek comics for quite a few years now. You might remember that we recently did a Positively Trek episode about the 400th issue, which actually came out, in 2022. So they did a lot of work before that point, and since then they've stepped up the game even more with this ongoing Star Trek series written by Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, which continues to come out this year with new issues releasing monthly. I have just started reading these. I'm a little bit behind. I've started reading the first omnibus edition of the issues in this series, Volume 1, Godshock. And I'm really blown away by the storytelling here. They're doing some really fascinating stuff. So those issues continue to come out. If you haven't read those yet, you can catch up, like I said, with these omnibuses, which I will talk a little bit about later more. There's more of them coming out, of course, in 2024. But also, a spin-off of that Star Trek series is Star Trek Defiant, written by Christopher Cantwell. Now, I haven't read these yet. The mainline Star Trek series centers around Captain Sisko commanding the USS Theseus after his return from the wormhole in this mission kind of given to him by the Bajoran prophets. Accompanying him is Commander Data and Dr. Crusher, as well as Tom Paris and a few new crew members as well. And apparently the Defiant spin-off, I haven't gotten there yet, but Worf joins them at one point and decides to kind of go his own way with a different mission, commanding the Defiant. And in his crew, it's kind of a rogues gallery a little bit. You've got kind of the more abrasive characters like Ro Laren, but also the out-and-out villains like Lore. And then throw in there Ambassador Spock and a bunch of others. It sounds crazy. I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm really excited to read these. And these comics also continue to come out in 2024 as well. I do have the first omnibus edition that came out last year, and there's more of those coming as well as the series continues. So other comics that are coming out besides those in 2024, we have the Sons of Star Trek Issue number 1 is coming in March. Now, this is contained within the Star Trek/Star Trek Defiant continuity as well. It takes place in the aftermath of an event that takes place in those comics called Day of Blood, and it features some of the sons of Star Trek, just like it says in the title. We have Alexander, son of Worf. We also have Nog and Jake Sisko, and interestingly enough, Q's son as well. So definitely an eclectic group. I'm excited to read this as well. I think they're doing some really cool, interesting stuff. The story just gets wider and wider as we go here. Another series that continues to come out is a mini-series called Star Trek Picard's Academy. It's a 6-issue mini-series. There are currently 4 issues out. Number 4 just came out on January 3rd. Issue number 5 comes out in February. Issue 6 in March, and this is kind of geared towards a slightly younger crowd. I haven't read these yet either, but I do intend to pick up the omnibus, and we'll be covering that in an upcoming Positively Trek book club as well. I've heard generally good things from people who have read this one. I don't know a ton about it, but it does feature Jean-Luc Picard at the Academy, kind of his early Starfleet career before he actually becomes an officer. And another miniseries that is currently running, in fact, the 5th and final issue in this miniseries comes out this week. That is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, The Scorpius Run. Issue number 5, like I said, comes out this week. We have an omnibus edition of this coming out on June 4th that collects all of the issues. This has been a really fun series. It's also another one we're going to be talking about on the Positively Trek Book Club after that omnibus comes out on June 4th. I love Strange New Worlds. There's been some really fun storytelling in this mini-series, so I'm excited to talk about that for sure. And finally, other omnibus editions that are coming out in 2024, we have the Deep Space Nine The Dog of War series. That's coming out February 13th, 2024. That collects the issues of the miniseries featuring this adorable corgi that Quark acquires on Deep Space Nine. Those issues came out last year in 2023. I mentioned earlier the Day of Blood event that happened in the Star Trek and Star Trek Defiant comic series. The omnibus edition of that event comes out on March 12th, 2024. The omnibus edition of the motion picture Echoes comes out on March 26th, 2024. This was an adventure set during the time of course, Star Trek the Motion Picture. After that, on June 18th, 2024, we have Volume 2 of the Star Trek Defiant series, another piece of the action, continuing Worf and his crew's adventures aboard the Defiant. August 6th sees the release of the omnibus edition of Star Trek Halloween, this kind of weird Halloween macabre adventure that takes place during Star Trek The Next Generation. I have not read this yet, but I'm sure we will cover it in time for Halloween 2024 on the Book Club podcast. And finally, the last one that we have a date for so far in 2024, August 27th, is Star Trek Glass and Bone, Volume 3 of the ongoing Star Trek series by Jackson Lansing and Colin Kelly, which I will definitely, of course, be picking up because I am really into this current ongoing series. Well, there you have it. That is everything so far that we know is coming in 2024. Pretty comprehensive with the comics. I really like how they've stepped up in the kind of vacuum that the lack of book releases has left. But I want to hear from you. What are you most excited about to see or read or experience in Star Trek in 2024? There's a lot that I didn't even mention in this video. We've got conventions coming this year. There's a creation convention happening in San Francisco. That's pretty cool. Don't think I'm going to be able to make it to that. There's the regular Star Trek Las Vegas, Star Trek The Cruise. There's reference books, all of which I will be covering as we get closer to the release dates. I am planning on kind of doing a weekly roundup of Star Trek news on this channel, as well as kind of a monthly what to expect this month from Star Trek. So I have plans for those videos, as well as some other things that I'm working on for the channel. I know it's been a little quiet around here, but I'm looking at bringing it back. We, of course, still have the Positively Trek podcast, which I've mentioned a few times, the book club episodes as well of those. And I've recently started up my Treklit Reviews website again, which kind of was defunct for a little while, but I've been really enjoying getting back to doing book reviews and news related to the books and comics. And you can find that at www.treklit.com. I'll put a link in the description as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate the Patreon supporters for all of your help in bringing these videos to you. Thank you so very much. I could not do it without you. So once again, thank you for watching. Until next time, as always, live long and prosper.